Word.
I plugged the mic in, flipped a couple switches and started rhyming. It wasn't right then, but I kept writing, knowing I had to put the time in to earn my stipend. Do your guy a solid one time, subscribe and like this.
Right? So obviously I went through my process choosing my gear a lot like a lot of people did, right? I looked at the classic pieces and caught my sticker shock. Like, or at least like most people, if you ain't catching sticker shock looking at vintage 1073s and 1176 and LA 2As and whatnot, salute to you. You got bread. But I'm looking at them, right? And obviously the question comes, I think anybody would or should ask this question, is it worth it, right? To spend thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars over here on these pieces because they made these hit records when you can get a software emulation for pretty much free, at least comparatively speaking, right? Or a comparable, they say comparable clone for like less than a third of the price. And so you get to reading through forums, stay off of gear sluts, obviously. Gas. Um, and you see people talk about, well, it just don't sound the same. It don't sound the same. This one sound better. This sounds way, 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 way better. You know what I'm saying? Expletive deleted. Um, right? And it's like, okay, okay. How different are they? You know what I'm saying? Because I look at what the engineers that were there when all they had was these vintage pieces saying that, oh, well, if you got 10 of the same piece, you're going to get 10 different tones from them because the manufacturing tolerances back then weren't as tight as they are today. And so if the clone or the plug-in sounds kind of like its original, the vintage counterpart, well, which one does it kind of sound like, right? Because if it kind of sounds like any of them, doesn't that put it in the same family with them, considering they don't really sound like each other? You feel me? And I thought about that a lot. I didn't see a whole lot of people talking about that, but I thought about that a lot. You know what I'm saying? If two vintage LA 2As ain't going to sound the same as each other, you know what I'm saying? Then how much difference is there between those two? And is it more or less than the difference between either of those two and a WA2A or a CLA2A plugin, right? Like, and is it in a straight line or is it the cheaper the worse? Like, is it linear, right? Somehow I doubt that. And it makes me think, like, okay, when you say they sound different, is it just the tone? Because when I think about tone, I think of tone as something that I can add. Tone is additive, right? I'm not changing the tone of my vocal by running it through this tube preamp compressor. I'm adding tone to my vocal, at least in my mind, right? And if I'm just adding it on top, then I can add it later, right? I can add it in the box if it's just tone. And then there's noise, which I would argue noise is more important than tone. Because if I can add tone or not, right, then whether I add it on the way in or in the mixing process, I'm still just putting something on top. Noise, depending on what kind of noise we dealing with, right, might be something that needs to be taken away or fixed later on if it's not addressed right up front. And to in my mind anyway, again, to me that's a difference, right? Because the vintage piece is probably going to have the worst noise performance out of all of them. And the plug-in is probably going to have the best noise performance out of all of them. And the plug-in is almost certainly always going to be the cheapest option, and the vintage piece is almost always certainly going to be the most expensive option, right? And if I'm thinking noise is more important, why am I not all the way in the box? Well, workflow. If I have an external 1073, then it's easier for me to route that through whatever else I may have, right? Utilize inserts and different things like that versus plugging into my interface, right? And there may be a utility piece, like, say, for instance, one of the de-essers that I use to take care of when I'm using one of my brighter mics, or the expander that I use if I'm recording during the day and I can't control the noise outside of the place, right? There's a difference between sound treated and soundproofed, right? And again, that's really just dealing with stuff that I don't want to have to try to take away later after it's already recorded, right? I can add whatever I need to add. You feel me? So workflow is probably the biggest reason why I started looking at hardware to begin with. I started looking at a compressor because I wanted to be able to hear a compressed signal in my headphones when I'm recording my own vocals, instead of waiting to hear what it's going to sound like later on down the line and making my decisions on how I'm going to project my voice based off an idea. I wanted to hear more of that while I'm in the booth, so I got a compressor, and I wanted flexibility on how I interact with, or how I route through that and interact with it. So I got an outboard preamp, and I was already looking at utility pieces, and so that kind of was my journey. But if workflow and noise performance are more important than tone, well, maybe that tells exactly why I don't have any vintage pieces or official reissues in my studio.